I was loading the dishwasher when Lila walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. Her phone buzzed in her hand, but she ignored it, instead leaning against the counter with an almost practiced casualness. She had that look again, the one that had been creeping in over the past few months. Tired, distant, like she was in the same room but living in a different reality. "We have our annual corporate party next Friday," she said, stirring her wine glass in slow circles. "At the Meridian Hotel downtown. I think you'd like it." I glanced at her. Her tone was breezy, too much so, like she was trying to sell me on something she didn't believe herself. "Would I?" I asked, closing the dishwasher and wiping my hands on a towel. She laughed, but it came out strained. "It's not your usual scene, I know. A bunch of marketing people trying to impress each other, talking shop, but they encourage spouses to come. Might be fun." I could have left it at that, taken her words at face value, and not probed the tension underneath. But the past few months had taught me better. "You sound thrilled about me coming," I said, leaning against the counter across from her. Her cheeks flushed a little, but she smiled. "I just know how much you hate these things. I'm giving you an out. No pressure." There it was again, the same subtle push away I'd been feeling every time we talked lately. The late nights at work, the hushed phone calls she'd take in the bedroom with the door barely cracked open, and that one time I walked in on her texting, and she slammed her phone down so fast, you'd think it had burned her. I folded my arms. "I think I'll come." Her smile tightened, but she quickly covered it with another sip of wine. "Great. Just don't expect too much. It's work, you know?" I nodded, but something in my gut twisted. The next week felt like a slow buildup of unease. Lila didn't mention the party again, but I caught her in little moments, checking her phone more than usual, retreating to the bedroom to make calls, her laughter softer, more subdued when she thought I wasn't around. On the night of the party, I dressed in a tailored navy suit I hadn't worn since a wedding 2 years ago. Lila emerged from the bedroom looking radiant in a deep red dress that hugged her figure and accentuated her dark hair. "You look incredible," I said, and I meant it. She smiled, but there was something distant in her eyes. "Thanks." The drive to the hotel was quiet, punctuated only by the hum of the engine and the occasional buzz of her phone. She kept it face down in her lap, a detail that didn't escape me. The Meridian Hotel was a testament to corporate excess. Crystal chandeliers, sleek modern furniture, and an open bar that smelled like money. Lila walked in with a confidence that seemed to double when she was in her element. "Ethan, this is Robert, my boss," she said, pulling me toward a tall, broad-shouldered man in a perfectly tailored gray suit. His handshake was firm, his smile just a little too perfect. "I've heard a lot about you," Robert said, his tone dripping with charm. "Funny, I can't say the same," I replied, my voice light but my eyes sharp. Lila shot me a warning look, her lips curving into a nervous smile. "Ethan's just joking," she said quickly. Robert chuckled, a sound that felt rehearsed. "Lila's one of our stars. She's been working on a big campaign that's keeping everyone on their toes." "I can tell," I said, my gaze flicking to Lila. The night wore on in a blur of polite small talk, laughter that felt staged, and stolen glances. Lila introduced me to her coworkers, but her interactions with Robert lingered in my mind. There was an ease between them, a familiarity that didn't sit right. As the evening progressed, Lila excused herself to the bathroom, and I found myself standing near the bar, nursing a whiskey. 2 women from her team were chatting nearby, their voices carrying over the music. "I didn't think she'd bring him," one of them said, her tone laced with amusement. "I know," the other replied, smirking. "Must have been a last-minute decision." They both laughed softly, their heads tilting toward each other as if sharing a private joke. I felt my chest tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. When Lila returned, her smile was bright, but her eyes darted around the room like she was looking for someone, or avoiding someone. That night was the first time I let myself consider it. The possibility. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't leaving until I found out what. The hum of conversation buzzed in my ears as Lila guided me through the sprawling ballroom. It was like stepping into a magazine spread, a kaleidoscope of sequin dresses, sharp suits, and meticulously arranged decor. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, and a jazz quartet played softly near the far wall. Every corner exuded sophistication and money, the kind of atmosphere where people smiled wide but never meant it. Lila, of course, fit right in. She was gliding through the crowd, one hand lightly resting on my arm as she introduced me to her colleagues. To anyone watching, we probably looked like the perfect couple, a power duo navigating the professional elite. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in my chest, like an invisible thread pulling me towards something I didn't want to find. "This is Sarah," Lila said, gesturing to a petite blonde woman with strikingly sharp features. "She's on my team." "Sarah, this is Ethan, my husband." Sarah's handshake was brief, her smile quick and polite, but her eyes lingered on me a fraction longer than they should have. It wasn't flirtation, it was curiosity, like she was trying to piece something together. "It's nice to finally meet you," she said. "Lila talks about you all the time." "Does she?" I replied, my tone light but probing. Lila shot me a sideways glance that I pretended not to notice. "All good things, of course," Sarah said, her smile tightening before she excused herself. Lila leaned in closer to me, her voice low. "Don't take it personally. Sarah's just intense." I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. Something about the interaction felt off. And it wasn't just Sarah. It was the way people looked at Lila, the whispers that seemed to stop when we walked by. We made our way toward the bar, where Robert Hensley was holding court. He was surrounded by a group of laughing subordinates, his confidence radiating like heat. The way Lila's face lit up when she saw him made my jaw tighten. "Ethan," Robert greeted me with the same practiced charm as before. "Glad you could make it. Lila tells me you're an IT guy." "That's right," I said, offering a tight smile. "Nothing as exciting as marketing, but it pays the bills." Robert laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. "Hey, we all need tech wizards like you to keep the lights on. Speaking of which, Lila, that last presentation you gave? Brilliant. The board loved it." Lila smiled, but there was a faint blush on her cheeks. "Thanks, Robert. I couldn't have done it without your support." Their exchange felt loaded, like there was a subtext I wasn't privy to. I sipped my drink, watching them closely. Robert's hand lingered on Lila's arm for just a moment too long, and she didn't pull away. "So, Ethan," Robert said, turning his attention back to me, "what's it like being married to a rising star? She's got half the office jealous of her work ethic." "Is that what they're jealous of?" I said before I could stop myself. Lila stiffened beside me. Robert chuckled, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as if gauging me. "Don't worry, Ethan. You've got nothing to worry about with Lila," he said, his tone half joking. "She's the epitome of professionalism." "Of course," I replied, my voice flat. The night dragged on, each interaction leaving me more on edge. Lila was charming, attentive, the consummate hostess, but there was a tension in her movements, a flicker in her eyes that betrayed her calm exterior. At one point, I excused myself to get some air. The balcony overlooked the city, the skyline glittering against the dark sky. I leaned against the railing, trying to steady my thoughts. "You okay?" a voice said behind me. I turned to see Sarah, her arms crossed as she leaned casually against the doorframe. "Just needed a breather," I said. She nodded, stepping out onto the balcony with me. These things can be overwhelming. All the networking and fake smiles. I studied her for a moment. She seemed more relaxed out here, away from the crowd. "You've worked with Lila for a while, right?" 2 years, she said, glancing out at the view. "She's great. Talented. Driven. People look up to her." "And Robert?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Sarah hesitated, her expression hardening slightly. "He's complicated, but you probably already know that." "What's that supposed to mean?" She shrugged, her gaze turning sharp. "Nothing. Just, he has a way of getting close to people. Some people like that. Others don't." Before I could press her further, Lila appeared in the doorway, her smile strained. "There you are," she said, her voice light but her eyes cutting to Sarah. "I was wondering where you disappeared to." "Just chatting," I said, keeping my expression neutral. Sarah gave Lila a tight smile. I'll let you two get back to it. As she walked away, Lila turned to me, her expression guarded. What was that about? Nothing, I said, pushing off the railing. Just making small talk. Lila didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. Back inside, the party was in full swing. People were loosening up, the open bar working its magic. Lila excused herself to the restroom, and I took the opportunity to explore. My unease had grown into something tangible, a gnawing suspicion I couldn't ignore. As I wandered through the room, I caught snippets of conversation. People talking about work, office gossip, and occasionally, Lila. She's really bold, isn't she? Someone said. I'll say. Bringing him here was a choice, another replied. I paused near a cluster of people, pretending to check my phone. Do you think he knows? A woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. No way, her companion replied, laughing softly, but it's going to blow up eventually. It always does. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what they were talking about, but I had a sinking feeling I was about to find out. When Lila returned, her smile was as bright as ever, but I could see the cracks forming. The evening wasn't over yet, but I was already beginning to see the outlines of something dark and undeniable beneath the surface. I wasn't leaving until I had answers. The night was winding on, but my nerves were just starting to unravel. Lila was back at my side, her charm dialed up to maximum. She laughed easily, touched my arm often, and introduced me to every colleague who passed by. To anyone watching, we probably looked like a power couple. Her, the charismatic marketing star. Me, the supportive husband along for the ride. But I knew better. The cracks in her performance were subtle, but glaring if you knew where to look. Her eyes darted around the room too often, like she was keeping tabs on someone. Every time her phone buzzed, she glanced at it with the kind of urgency you don't show for meaningless texts. And then there were the little things. Her quickness to laugh off anything remotely personal. The way her voice tightened whenever Robert's name came up. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being managed, like she was playing a game and I didn't know the rules. I started noticing patterns. When Robert moved across the room, Lila's gaze would follow, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. When he passed near us, her shoulders stiffened, and she turned just slightly away, as if to avoid looking too interested or disinterested. Hey, I'm going to grab another drink, I said, stepping back from the group she just introduced me to. Okay, she said, her smile tight. I'll be over there with Sarah. I nodded and walked toward the bar, but once I was out of her line of sight, I doubled back, weaving through the crowd toward the hallway that led to the restrooms. The hallway was quieter, the noise from the ballroom muffled by the heavy double doors. I glanced around, pretending to check my phone as I waited. After a minute or two, Lila emerged from the crowd, heading straight for the hallway, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't see me. I followed at a distance, staying just out of sight as she turned a corner near the elevators. My heart was pounding in my chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. Lila was standing near the elevator bank, her back to me, talking to Robert. Their voices were low, urgent, and I couldn't make out what they were saying over the pounding in my ears. Robert stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm. She didn't pull away. I felt a surge of heat rise in my chest. Before I could stop myself, I stepped forward, my voice sharper than I intended. Lila. She whipped around, her eyes wide. For a split second, she looked like a kid caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Ethan, she said, her voice strained but cheerful. I was just talking to Robert, I finished for her, my eyes flicking to him. He didn't look surprised, just mildly annoyed, like I was interrupting something important. Ethan, it's not what you think, she started, but I held up a hand. What do I think, Lila? I asked, my voice low but taut. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you didn't just come out here for fresh air. Robert cleared his throat, his smile polished and professional. Ethan, I think you're misunderstanding. Shut up, I snapped, turning back to Lila. Are you going to explain? Or should I ask him? Ethan, stop it, she hissed, her face flushed. We were just talking. About work. At the elevator? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Robert raised his hands in mock surrender. I'll leave you two to it, he said smoothly, stepping toward the elevator. Yeah, you do that, I said, watching him until the elevator doors closed behind him. Then I turned back to Lila. Her eyes were glossy, her expression somewhere between defiance and guilt. You're being ridiculous, she said, crossing her arms. I came out here to talk about a campaign. That's it. And you couldn't do that in front of everyone else? She let out a frustrated sigh. God, Ethan, not everything is a conspiracy. Robert's my boss. We talk. That's what people do at work. Not like this, I said, my voice hard. And not after the way you've been acting these past few months. Her face hardened. Acting? What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, stepping closer. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way you've been avoiding me like I'm some kind of stranger in my own house. She opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of laughter from the ballroom cut her off. She glanced toward the noise, her jaw tightening. This isn't the place for this, she said, her voice low. No, I said, my voice cold. It's not. But I'm not dropping this, Lila. Not until I get the truth. She stormed back into the ballroom, leaving me standing in the hallway, my mind racing. I wanted to follow her, to press her for answers, but something held me back. Instead, I returned to the bar, grabbing another whiskey and scanning the room. Lila was back with Sarah and a few other coworkers, laughing and smiling like nothing had happened. But I saw through it. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and her hands fidgeted with the hem of her dress. I turned away, my gaze sweeping over the crowd until it landed on something that made my stomach drop. Lila's phone, sitting unattended on a small table near the bar. She never left her phone unattended. I hesitated for a moment, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. Then I picked it up, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. She hadn't changed her password. It was still my birthday. I scrolled through her messages, my heart pounding in my chest. Most of them were mundane. Work chats, a text from her mom, a reminder about a dentist appointment. But then I saw it. A thread with someone saved as R. The most recent message was from tonight. Can we talk privately? You looked amazing tonight. I can't stop thinking about last week. I felt the blood drain from my face as I scrolled further. The messages weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. The flirtation was obvious. The familiarity. The secrecy. I put the phone back where I'd found it, my mind reeling. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't innocent, and I wasn't leaving until I had proof. I didn't even realize how tightly I was gripping the edge of the bar until my knuckles turned white. The room around me felt surreal, like I was stuck in a slow-motion scene from a bad movie. The conversations blurred into indistinct murmurs. The clinking glasses became a distant echo. The messages from R kept replaying in my head. You looked amazing tonight. I can't stop thinking about last week. Last week. What happened last week? I thought back to the nights Lila had come home late, her excuses always teetering on the edge of plausible. Long meetings. A client dinner ran over. Traffic was terrible. I stared at the spot where her phone had sat, now reclaimed by her. She was across the room, chatting with Sarah and a couple of other coworkers, her laugh too loud and her posture too tense. My mind boiled with questions. How long had this been going on? How deep did it run? I drained the rest of my whiskey and walked toward her, the noise of the party fading as adrenaline surged through me. Lila saw me coming before I reached her, and her face froze for half a second before she forced a smile. Ethan, she said brightly, we were just talking about... Can I talk to you for a second? I interrupted, my voice tight. Sarah and the others exchanged glances, their smiles faltering. Lila hesitated, her hand clutching her glass. Ethan, I'm in the middle of a conversation. Now, I said firmly. The tension was palpable. Lila set her drink down and followed me toward a quieter corner near the entrance, where the noise from the party dulled slightly. What is your problem? She hissed, her voice low but sharp. You're acting like a lunatic. My problem? I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. My problem is that my wife has been lying to me for months, and I'm finally starting to see why. Her eyes widened. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Lila. I saw the messages on your phone. Her face drained of color, but she recovered quickly, her expression hardening. You went through my phone? Are you serious? Don't turn this around on me, I snapped. Whose are? Her mouth opened, then closed, her eyes darting away for a split second. It's no one, just a coworker. You looked amazing tonight. I can't stop thinking about last week, I quoted, my voice laced with venom. That doesn't sound like just a coworker to me. Lila's face flushed red, her hands balling into fists. You're overreacting. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, I demanded, stepping closer. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're having an affair. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it outright. But then her shoulders sagged, and she looked away. It's complicated, she said softly. Complicated. The word hit me like a gut punch. Complicated? I repeated, my voice rising. You're my wife, Lila. We made vows. There's nothing complicated about that. Keep your voice down, she hissed, glancing around nervously. No, let them hear, I said, my voice loud enough to turn a few heads. Let everyone know how the great Lila Rivers is screwing around behind her husband's back. Her eyes flared with anger. You don't know what you're talking about. You've been so checked out lately, Ethan. Do you even realize how hard it's been for me? How lonely I've felt. Lonely? I said, laughing bitterly. I'm not the one sneaking off to hotel hallways and sending flirty texts to my boss. She flinched at the word boss, and that's when it clicked. It's Robert, isn't it? I said, my voice cold. She didn't answer, but her silence was all the confirmation I needed. The next few moments were a blur. I turned away from her, my vision clouded by rage. I couldn't believe it. The man she had been so eager to introduce me to, the one who had clapped me on the shoulder and smiled like we were old friends, he was the one. I spun back around to face her. How long? She hesitated. How long? I growled. A few months, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Months. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Ethan, it didn't mean anything, she said quickly, her eyes pleading. It was just a mistake. A stupid one-time thing. One time, I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. Because that's not what the texts say, Lila. Or should I ask Robert about last week? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But then her expression shifted, her defensiveness kicking back in. Fine, she said, crossing her arms. Yes, I screwed up. But maybe if you'd been more present, more supportive, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. I stared at her, my mind reeling. You're blaming me? I'm not blaming you, she said, though her tone said otherwise. I'm just saying this isn't all on me. Before I could respond, a voice interrupted us. Everything okay here? I turned to see Robert, his face calm but his eyes wary. He had the audacity to look concerned, like he wasn't the reason my marriage was crumbling in real time. You, I said, stepping toward him. Ethan, don't, Lila said, grabbing my arm, but I shook her off. Stay out of this, Robert, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Unless you want everyone in this room to know exactly what kind of boss you are. Robert raised his hands in mock surrender. Let's not make a scene. It's a little late for that, I said, my fists clenching. Ethan, please, Lila said, her voice breaking. I turned to her, the weight of everything crashing down on me. You want me to stop? Fine. But this isn't over, Lila. Not by a long shot. Without another word, I walked away, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed me. The drive home was a blur, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly it hurt. Lila called my name from the passenger seat, but I didn't respond. My mind was too busy replaying every red flag, every lie, every moment I had ignored because I trusted her. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I had made a decision. Ethan, please, she said as I opened the door. Can we just talk? I paused, my back to her. We'll talk, I said, my voice cold. But not tonight. I walked inside without looking back, slamming the door behind me. I barely slept that night. Lila had stayed in the guest room, leaving me alone with my thoughts in the dark, suffocating quiet of our bedroom. My mind was a hurricane of memories, piecing together every moment that now felt tainted. The late nights, the excuses, the tension in her voice whenever I asked too many questions. How had I let this happen? When the morning came, it hit me like a cold slap. This wasn't a bad dream I could wake up from. This was my life. Lila was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, nursing a cup of coffee at the island. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face pale and drawn. The usual polished version of her was gone, replaced by someone who looked as lost as I felt. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice hesitant. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, keeping the island between us. "Ethan," she started, setting her mug down, "we need to talk." "Do we?" I said, my tone sharp. "Because it feels like you've been doing a lot of talking with Robert already." She winced but didn't look away. "I know I screwed up, okay? I'm not going to deny that. But we can fix this. I want to fix this." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You think it's that simple? You cheat on me for months, lie to my face, and now you want to fix this?" "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I was stupid and selfish, and I hate myself for what I've done. But we've been together for 10 years, Ethan. Doesn't that mean something?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. 10 years. A decade of building a life together, of shared memories and dreams. And now it all felt like it had been built on sand. "It did mean something," I said quietly, "but you threw it all away." She looked down, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The tension hung heavy between us all day. I couldn't be in the same room with her for more than a few minutes before the anger bubbled back up, and I'd have to leave. By the afternoon, the silence was unbearable. Around 4 p.m., I made up my mind. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Lila asked, stepping into the hallway. "Out," I said curtly. "Ethan, please. We can't keep avoiding this." "I need space," I snapped, slamming the door behind me. I ended up at a bar downtown, the kind of place where no one asks questions. The whiskey burned as it went down, numbing the edges of my anger. I tried to think of something, anything, that didn't involve Lila or Robert. But no matter how hard I tried, their faces kept intruding, their betrayal looming like a shadow over everything. By the third drink, my phone buzzed. "Lila, please come home. We need to talk." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. The last thing I wanted was to talk. But the thought of her sitting there, waiting, made something inside me twist. When I got home, the house was quiet. The living room lights were dimmed, and Lila was sitting on the couch, a box of tissues on the coffee table. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Thanks for coming back," she said softly. I didn't respond, dropping my keys on the counter and crossing my arms. "So, talk." She took a shaky breath. "I need you to know that this wasn't about you. It was never about you. I was feeling lost, stuck, like I didn't know who I was anymore." "Don't give me that it's not you. It's me crap," I said, my voice rising. "You don't get to make this about your existential crisis. You made a choice, Lila, a choice to betray me." "I know," she said, her voice trembling, "and I hate myself for it. But Ethan, I love you. I've always loved you. That never changed." I laughed bitterly. Funny way of showing it. She flinched, tears welling up again. "I was stupid, okay? I let myself get caught up in something that didn't matter because I was scared. Scared of how distant we'd become. Scared that I wasn't enough for you anymore." "Distant?" I said, my voice incredulous. "You're the one who's been pushing me away. I've been trying to connect with you for months, and all I got was excuses and closed doors." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I know. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me a chance to make this right." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to throw something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. But another part of me, the part that remembered our wedding day, the vacations, the nights spent laughing until our sides hurt, just felt hollow. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the room. I don't know if I can do this, Lila. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I'll do anything, she said, her voice desperate. Counseling, therapy, whatever you need. I'll quit my job if that's what it takes. Her words caught me off guard. Lila loved her job. Her career was her passion, her identity. The thought of her giving it up was almost unthinkable. Would you? I asked, narrowing my eyes. Would you really walk away from everything for me? She nodded without hesitation. Yes. If it means saving us, I'll do it. For the first time all day, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes that felt real. Genuine remorse. But remorse wasn't enough. Not yet. I need time, I said finally, my voice hoarse. I can't make any decisions right now. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't respond, retreating to the bedroom and closing the door behind me. As I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed photo of us on the nightstand, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days that followed were a strange mix of silence and distance. Lila tiptoed around the house like she was afraid to break something, her eyes constantly flicking toward me as if gauging my mood. I didn't give her much to work with. I spent most of my time avoiding her, leaving early, staying out late, anything to keep from being in the same room. But the space didn't help. If anything, it made the anger fester. Every time I looked at her, I saw Robert. Every time she spoke, I heard her excuses. And every night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I replayed the texts, the hallway encounter, the whispered lies. The betrayal clung to me like a second skin. One night, about a week after the party, I came home to find her waiting for me in the living room. She'd lit a few candles, their soft glow casting flickering shadows across the walls. On the coffee table sat a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. I thought we could talk, she said, her voice tentative. I wanted to turn around and leave. But something in her expression stopped me, a mix of determination and desperation that I hadn't seen before. Fine, I said, sitting down on the opposite end of the couch. She poured the wine, sliding a glass toward me. I didn't touch it. I've been thinking a lot, she began, her hands trembling slightly as she held her own glass. About us. About what I've done. And, I said, my tone cold. And I know I can't undo what happened, she said, her voice breaking. But I need you to understand how sorry I am. I let myself get swept up in something stupid because I was too much of a coward to face what was happening between us. I shook my head. This isn't about Lila. This is about you. You made a choice, a selfish, destructive choice, and now you want me to act like it's some mutual failing. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. You're right. It was my choice, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I still love you, Ethan. I never stopped loving you. Love? I said bitterly. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot more like betrayal. Her tears came then, silent and steady. She didn't try to defend herself, and for the first time, that felt worse than her arguments. I quit my job, she said quietly. The words hit me like a slap. What? I quit, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. I sent in my resignation this morning. I thought maybe if I showed you how serious I am about fixing this, it would mean something. I stared at her, trying to process the weight of what she just said. Lila had always been fiercely ambitious, her career one of the most important things in her life. The idea of her walking away from it was almost inconceivable. And what happens now? I asked, my voice flat. I don't know, she admitted. I just know I can't keep living like this, not without trying to make things right. For the first time since the party, I felt a crack in my armor. I wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the righteous fury that had carried me through the past week. But her resignation was a gesture I couldn't ignore, a sacrifice that showed she was willing to put us above everything else. But was it enough? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. You think quitting your job is going to fix this? No, she said quickly. I know it's not enough, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, Moving if we need to. I'll do anything, Ethan. Just tell me what you need. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I stared down at my hands, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I don't know what I need, I said finally. All I know is that I don't trust you, and I don't know if I ever will. Her sob caught in her throat, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. I looked away, the sight of her pain stirring something uncomfortable in my chest. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? For her to feel the hurt she'd caused me? So why did it feel so hollow? That night, I slept on the couch again, my thoughts a tangled mess of anger, grief, and confusion. When the morning came, I made a decision. I sat down at the dining table with a notepad and pen, jotting down 2 columns, stay and leave. The leave column filled quickly. The betrayal, the lies, the shattered trust. But as I stared at the empty, stay column, memories began to creep in. Our first date at a tiny Italian restaurant where she spilled wine on her dress and laughed it off like it was nothing. The way she'd surprise me with my favorite takeout after a long day. The nights we'd stay up talking about nothing and everything. By the time I put the pen down, I still didn't have an answer. Later that evening, I found myself standing in the living room, staring at Lila's wedding ring sitting on the coffee table. She'd left it there, a silent message that she was willing to give me the space to decide. I picked it up, the weight of the metal feeling heavier than it should. As I stood there, the sound of her footsteps came from the hallway. She stopped in the doorway, her face pale and hopeful. "Ethan," she said softly. I looked up at her, the ring clutched in my hand. "I don't know if we can fix this," I said honestly, "but I'm willing to try. For now." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks as she nodded. "That's all I want," she whispered. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. But it was a start.